you've both been to a meeting last week, and I was just sort of, I noticed something during the week, which is to do with the conditioning. And we all, maybe not we all, but the conditioned self structure, which is sort of subconscious and cellular conditioning of the body, with all its memories and reactivity, the spontaneous, almost instinctive reactivity, is so ingrained and unseen that it's worth exploring, because the discussions that we have about what is the self and what are my thoughts and how am I feeling and what's my traumas and all of these things are great. They're very useful. They're all useful sort of to get all of this moving. But I noticed, this is a funny story, I noticed I was driving, I've moved recently, and I went to the supermarket and I bought some groceries, and I just, when you get in those states where you're zoned out, you're just going, you're not driving, something's driving the car, and anyway, I arrived at the roundabout of the place I used to live at, and I've sort of done this before. I've just been switched off, and 5 minutes has disappeared, and I've arrived at somewhere, and I don't actually, there's no annoyance now. It's just, I just laugh. I go, oh, and it was just so apparent. I said, who was actually driving the car? Who was, I was this thinking, doing self was completely absent, and there was just a gap. I'm missing allotment of time, and it was so apparent that this can all do itself. This intelligent human being, life, whatever this human being is, can just do itself. It knows, it's so well trained. It's repetition, and it gets memory, and it's so well trained. It's so well ingrained with what it learns, that it can do it on autopilot, which is what most of the time, most of what's happening is on autopilot. And then we're aware of a little slither of a story on the top, and that's the one that's so important. But I was just smiling. I was thinking, gosh, it was just like another lesson in the flow of life, because it was just like, see, all of this is happening. Imagine how much stuff like this is happening with everything every day, every thought, every reactive little twist in the way the mind changes something into the importance of it or the interpretation of it. It's all doing this all the time. It was very peaceful. The whole thing was peaceful. There was humor. It wasn't a big deal, but it was just like a little lesson to say, remember that all of that stuff is always going on, and there can be understandings that open up, and there's sort of this first opening to what is really here and what we really are is kind of important, to let this all start to see itself in a different light, re-educate itself, recognize itself, as Bernie knows. Sailor Bob used to say, a very interesting talker on this sort of topic. But anyway, it was just an interesting little lesson. It was just so clear that was something I need to be aware of all the time, because it's happening all the time. It doesn't matter. It's not a bad thing. It was just like a gentle reminder. Yeah. It's really interesting the way we don't even realize the autopilot that's running all the time. And there's kindness in that. It's not the enemy. There's kindness in it, but it's just sort of be aware that that's running. Well, this is the story that's happening here. I don't know whether anyone else relates to that. Anyone else have any stories that are like that?
Totally. It's my experience all the time. Another thing that I've noticed is when the real pilot takes the reins, he's also on autopilot. It just gives the appearance of being a real pilot who's taking control of the life. It feels like I'm now making decisions and doing things, but you look a little bit closer and it's also just coming up spontaneously and flowing in the same way.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What's the difference between what you're calling autopilot, as in letting go all the thinking and letting something move you, and what you're talking about as the ideal for us. Because it sounds like you're saying about, when you're talking about us letting go of the mind and just letting flow and being lived by that universal energy, that sounds a little bit like what you described on autopilot to me. They seem very similar. So what's...
I think that's what I'm alluding to. What I'm saying is that it's all autopilot. Like there isn't, like, what I'm saying is it's all running. Life is all running on, it's just a way of saying it, but it's like life is all running on autopilot. It's flowing. This intelligence is interacting through a human biology and interest in brain and, chemistry, and all of that reactivity that's going on is we think there is a pilot. And my reference to that is just the reminder that it's actually it's running. It's just doing. Life is doing what it's doing. And we could call it autopilot because it's autonomous. It's the whole thing interacting. But, the small mind, the thinking separate self, thinks I'm doing it. There's just like nothing. There's nothing there. Because it was just humor. It was just comedy. I'll get onto that actually. That popped up as well. But I think what I'm trying to say is it's all autopilot, but it's not really autopilot because there's no pilot. It's just happening. It's just happening. It's just a way of saying it's not the pilot that's controlling or running this, that we think we are, and we construct a story about how we did it, and there's some validity in that for the human being, to learn what it can do to find resources and to keep itself safe. So there's validity in that story making. The human being in this mind makes up a story about how it worked. So next time it comes across it, it can deal with it in an efficient manner. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's good. That's learning. That's like biology, just sort of, learning instincts of survival in a very base sense. You could call that learning. It's autopilot. And then, but all of this is, what I'm saying is all of this intelligence, the complexity of this intelligence that's running all of the time, is just absorbing new lessons, and that gets absorbed in. And this, the complexity of how much we absorb and how much we react to that without even realizing it is kind of what I'm referring to. I hope that answered your question.
I think that's, yeah, the pilot, the so-called pilot is on autopilot.
Yeah, but it thinks it's on pilot. It thinks it's very good at constructing a story, and it seems to be that that's the way we do things. Nothing wrong with anything, as I keep saying. There's nothing wrong with any of this, except when it sort of creates that tension and contractive boundary of suffering that results in suffering, psychological suffering from not being able to do it well enough, or as I said in the past, when I was driving the car and I'd get to somewhere and I'd go, oh, idiot, why did I waste? I mean, I mightn't say those exact words, but there's frustration because, that went wrong. I made a mistake there. I should have known. Why did I do that? Yeah, all that rubbish. All that complete waste of energy, complete and utter waste of energy. That was the one thing that I noticed when, there was a lot of change in perspective, because, this character, John, used to be very, very, very tight, highly stressed, controlling, I used to roll my eyes when I used to hear the expression, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. I used to roll my eyes and go, nah, if it's meant to be, it's up to me. That was how I lived my life. I could, with the force of will, control pretty much everything that was going to happen. It's such a delusion. That's what I laugh at it these days, I think. So thankfully that's fallen away, because that was such a lot of wasted energy on something that was it didn't exist anyway. But something I was saying now, it's more like humor. It's like humor is when I think I saw something recently. Someone was talking about humor and what is it or something, and it's like humor is when we have this separate self that thinks everything is a certain way, and then we understand it, all right, and we've got it categorized, and it fits in there, and good, we know how it is, which is the main thing, that like a separate self, the entity, the identity, loves to know how things are. And as I was sort of alluding to on some other talks, it's not that there's anything wrong or bad in this ego self. What I call the ego self is this mind construct of self. It's not the ego that I'm so good. It's the ego that I'm talking about. It's just the mind-made separate self entity, okay, the thought entity called ego. And that's not a bad thing. It's not doing anything wrong. It's trying to help. It's trying to, it's trying to be supportive. Life doesn't hate itself. Life doesn't try to give itself pain. It just gets all a bit tangled up and confused, I think. And I can remember in the past having conversations, almost conversations. It sounds a bit crazy now, but it's not really. It was just like, seeing the resistance coming from the ego to something that may be beneficial to transition through. This whole awareness, understanding itself and opening. And there's this blockage because the ego doesn't like, the mind-made self doesn't like it to change. It likes to know how it is. If it's in there, I can understand it. I'm safe. I know how it is. I can quantify it. And of course, nothing is quantifiable because everything's always changing and moving. And it's just like the ego keeps trying to catch a piece of the flowing river. And it's so good. I got it. I got it. It keeps changing. Oh, well, I still got it. It needs to be like that. It doesn't work. So there's tension. It's like, and that's the way a lot of people live their lives, As I said before, catching lightning in a jar or trying to take a snapshot of the flowing river with all its ripples and saying, "Stay! What are you doing? You keep changing." Whoa, I've just had it worked out. It's kind of mad, but it's what we do. I look at it now. This can still happen, but it's fun now because it's just it's a comedy. And what I was just saying about humor is this. I don't know whether I'm just gonna try and explain this, but it's sort of fairly fresh and it's still being formulated, if you like, in this openness. It's like humor. The separate self, this mind-made separate self, has this idea of how things are, okay, and we just settled into that, and we seem to be like, that's like a reflex. It's it's like an instinctive reflex that becomes normal. So the mind stays in this contracted state, and as I said, I talked about last week, when things opened up for this character, this human being, there was I didn't really explain, but that moment when things let go, there was a definite decontraction. It was like the cramp of mind. The mind's always cramped. It's just got an involuntary cramp, and there was a like, finally, it didn't realize it could do this, but it let go and didn't cramp anymore. So the mind contraction didn't do that anymore, but it had to learn that it could do that. And then once that was seen as a possibility, then it sort of goes into this, adjustment time, I suppose. But I think this separate self lives in this contracted state, and we know how things are. And then when somebody says something that's a little bit, it's not serious, but it's not the way this separate self knows it to be, it feels like this constructed mind entity gets thrown. It's like it's thrown off balance. It's like it breaks the knowing how it is area. And innate in this human being, in this awareness, there's a knowing that it's not really what this is. And it feels like when somebody breaks through that with a bit of light-hearted, off-center, not the way you were thinking, it frees this entity that really doesn't want to stay contracted. It frees it. It tricks it into opening it for a moment, and it sees the open nature of itself. And it feels like that's something to do with humor. Humor is like this contracted entity being liberated for a moment, which is what it's yearning for. And it sort of goes, "Whoa, I didn't see it that way. Where did that come from?" And then it sort of celebrates that openness, that different way of not knowing, and that it tickles it all somehow. So I don't know whether that's something it'll keep formulating, but it feels like, yeah, the barriers are freed up by lighthearted, not serious, not life-threatening humor, or a different way of seeing things. And this entity, which is already yearning to be open and free, has a moment of that, and it loves the feeling of it. So it celebrates it by laughter. And Jane, dare I ask, how has your week been with your different way of seeing things, or different exposure, different perspective offered up here?
The first few days were sort of challenging. It's like somebody had just shaken me up, and there were just bits flying all over the place. I was just in a little bit of a whirlwind.
Yeah, sounds great.
Somebody offered to give me a healing session. I very rarely go for healing sessions, but I just said yes. I thought, okay, I'm just going to go with life as it turns up. I don't know. I got up this morning and should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? Oh my God, what's me? What's my head? What's my head and what's my truth? And in the end, I just sat down and did absolutely nothing because I confused the hell out of myself. And I just thought, okay, until something stands me up and moves me in a direction, I haven't got a clue what to do. So I'm going through moments of whirlwind confusion and moments of absolute blissful, natural breathability. So I'm just letting it be what it is, John. I'm just letting it all happen.
Oh, great. Yeah, no, there's lots of stuff going on there, and there probably already was, nothing to do with our discussion. Our discussion's just tickling a different point of view that is possibly opening something that that might be useful. It's all words, they don't really work that way. But I was more asking just to make sure that you weren't destabilized and so confused you just want, I don't know what was going on. I took all that stuff on board and now I don't know where I am, because that's not the intention. The intention is just to keep pointing you back to looking at what the first character is, what the first I is that has all of this control and doing, because that doesn't need to be found, by the way. So the age-old question that a lot of the the masters, or Ramana Maharshi question, which is, who am I? And this, in my experience, John's here, has been through inquiry. That was actually useful to changing a lot of things, but it's only when that sort of was left on autopilot running in the background. Actually, it had been introduced, and then it was just running as this biology, mind, intelligence, whatever mixed awareness expression was all running together, and that was just churning. That was just doing what it was doing in the background. That question of who am I, and then when it's not actually searched for in a contracted way, it's just openly looking. And that's almost the balance that we're talking about at that starting meditation. It's this balance that you're not actually trying to control or do. It's just bringing it back into harmony so it can express in the most natural flowing way. And that question, who am I, is really just left hanging without an answer, because this awareness kind of is reminded of itself. And so you don't actually have to find the answer. That's the conundrum, is the answer is a blockage. It's more opening to not having to know everything the way it is by this entity that is the separate self. It's a reminder that entity that's trying to find the answer is what's being encouraged to be opened and let go of, because in that there's a flow of natural intelligence and life. And yet I was listening to your explanation about and you had certain things happening, and there was an instinct to jump in and say, yeah, but who's the one? But it didn't matter, because whatever way that intelligence, that human being is navigating this environment, this world, whatever way, every time we make a word, it's already sort of taken a form, taken a finite direction. And if you have ways of expressing yourself that's possibly not in the non-duality way, which is there is no self and I is not real, it doesn't need to be that strict. So if I say I all the time because I'm trying to communicate here, But it sounds like the underlying theme that's going on there is lovely. You know, there's an openness to what you're doing. And I would just still encourage the easiest way is just to keep looking at every time you say, oh, I'm going to do this, and just keep saying, who's that I? Who's that I? Who's that I? Because it starts a conditioning, a habit, starts a new habit pattern for the mind not to automatically assume anything. It just keeps teasing it into this unknown openness. And it's almost like in the early stages to help untrain the conditioning that I'm doing, and I have to, and I got this and I did that, and I'm, to think that there's any I in control of any of this is just, the reminder can be every time I is said, or every time the thought of I'm doing this is triggered, just to look at that, just to gently look at that and go, oh, look at that, I do that, I do that, I do assume, I do just take it to be this thing, this me that it's just always been me. I do assume that that's doing this. I'm just going to keep watching that and just see the veracity of that. Just see if it's there. Is it really there? And as I keep saying, it's not something that has to be pinned down, quantified, or made into an object, because it isn't. It's more just a reminder that might just be just allowed to be open, a bit unknowable, unknown. That entity that I keep using as the reference point, I'll just keep looking at that, just gently looking at that, just reminding this awareness that is, has always been contracted as a structure, as an object that's me, that's I. So it's normal. It's like breathing. It's like an instinct. It's like the autopilot in the background. But it's just an autopilot isn't possibly serving the blossoming of that openness. That's what I'm trying to gently encourage, because there's lots of non-duality that really nails you down if you say one word of I did this, or I think, or I feel. And I don't think that's useful. I don't think it's good for a shock. That's about all. I don't know. This is just what's coming in this opinion, but it's a gentle way of saying, just keep watching what I is, and it might be helpful. But it doesn't matter if you say I and you feel like I and you do stuff from the perspective of an I, because it's be unlikely that habit pattern is just dropped instantaneously. Just words, they're not even good words. This awakening thing you're already awake, actually. It's just undoing the conditioning that writes all the stories that's happening on top and hiding it. It's more like that than awakening. It's more like not being clouded and confused and believing in the story that's placed on top of what innately is going on in this vibrant expression.
Is there an intentional aspect to this though as well, John? Is there any form of intentional element to living?
Not personal. Not personal intention. Because anytime there is a feeling of personal intention, it's coming from a constructed mind-made separate self. There is intentionality in life, I think, but intention seems to have this coming from a particular individual source, separate source. So life seems to have, if we use the word intention, it seems to direct us back in the way the human mind thinks, is that someone is intending. An object, a separate object, is intending something different. The way it feels to me is that life, when I'm talking about it, I might personify life a lot, because it's the only way we can even, relate to anything. In the human mind, we have to have an object to relate to. So I'm personifying life in a lot of these discussions, but it doesn't feel like it is really a person, obviously. It's everything. And this and everything doesn't actually need an intention. I think it is somehow evolving with itself, blossoming and learning, but it seems spontaneously intelligent. Now, where intention fits into that, I don't know. But the most common way to respond to that, is there intention to this? it triggers a thought here that relates to an individual person that has an intention. And what I'm saying is that is not the case, because there isn't anything separate really. There's an experience of separation, and if we look at that a different way, if life, energy, intelligence, whatever we call this, isness, universe, whatever we call it, which is expressing, coming together as form here, apparent form, because it's not really ever separated from anything else. It's always completely connected in the fabric that it is. All right, it's like a network. It's like a completely connected fabric. It's all texture in the same, and so it can appear that then has thoughts. It feels separate. It has the experience of feeling like a beautiful, vibrant, independent perspective in this beautiful, blossoming, creative energy. And that can have a feeling of having intention, just as it has a feeling of being a separate entity, a separate self. But it's just part of the story of what's appearing. It's not innately. There can be anything happening and appearing, but it's not really a separate object that really has intention. But this part of this story that can appear, which nothing wrong with that, if it's seen as part of the play in this whole, intention can arise. Intention happens just like emotions happen, just like thoughts happen. It can, if that human being feels like it's separate and feels like it wants to have intention, it's not actually the human being doing that. It's the ultimate intelligence of life blossoming and texturing itself that way. And there's nothing wrong with, I don't think there's anything wrong with anything. There's nothing wrong with anything. We're just looking at what it actually is going on, because that blossoming of texturing of intention, supposed intention that's appearing as a thought process, a story, is doing what it's doing. And the complexity of how that interacts with the whole is, I would say, impossible to calculate. We just think we can calculate it as human beings, saying, I've got it. I know why it's doing that, so it's got intent. But ultimately, once again, you can feel I feel what's going on with this explanation is it's just still open. It's open and appearing, and yet it's open and it's appearing and it's doing stuff and it's interacting with the whole. So that happens there. Who knows how that affects a butterfly in the Amazon? As I've said before, that the idea of intention appears and something else responds. But it's not really cause and effect. It's just all happening, blossoming, interacting. It feels like too that it's just a story, but it feels like this universe, this vibrant energy, whatever it is there are so many experiences that are happening, and it's all now, and they're all just interacting and they're all changing everything. So in that, it feels like it can have intention, which changes the whole. Evolves as a word that we think we understand, but it's evolving in itself. And intention, that feeling of intention is probably part of that, but it's not really any individual with intention. It's got its own intention, if I personify it. But I know I've got a fair idea why you asked the question. I'm just assuming from referencing, but it's very much.
Question is because you're talking about this wonderful autopilot, but it actually took you to the wrong house. So I wondered whether you needed the intention so it could drive you to the right house. That's what went through my mind when you first mentioned autopilot. And so that's been playing in the background. I haven't been able to let it go. So.
Well, it's lovely. I love this sort of interaction. I love this because we have blind spots always as this, conditioned human being. But I think
I would have sat there thinking, well, couldn't you have at least got me to the right house if you were going to flow through me, No,
I didn't feel like that, because I didn't feel like anyone was doing anything. There was no one that got me to the wrong place, and there was no one that should have done it better, and there was no. I'm not the puppet with a puppeteer taking me to the wrong house. It's just all happening. It just all happened that way. And the way it looked like was the conditioning in this organism in these memories and brain cells and all the stuff that's interacting just was more conditioned to do that than anything else. And it was just a reminder that that's probably happening with lots of stuff that I'm not aware of. You know, even having a sort of more open perspective on things, there's probably that still going on, which is texturing and tinting, you know, what's being experienced and reacted to. But the idea of that I can, you know, that idea of, if I had an intention that would have directed this, that feels to me like more stories on top of stories on top of stories. Because actually, who is having the intention to control, who is doing the controlling? There's two layers of probably not there-ish stuff to me. Probably not there, you know, or I would say with a lot of, I can't say certainty because nothing is certain. That's the funny thing. There's no, you know, I suppose this human being is expressing opinions always whenever I'm trying to communicate. But in that, I don't take it too seriously. Probably gets things mixed. It's probably still conditioned. It's probably saying stuff based on what it's experienced. It's just, you know, we're interacting here and there's something beautiful happening. That's why I love when you say stuff like that, because it's like, that's sort of from the blind side. I don't think that way. I don't see that. So it's nice to be able to, you know, unpack that a little bit. But no, I'll just finish. I just think so, yeah, because I know it's a very common thing in spirituality for people to say, well, I set an intention that I'm going to do it like this and it's going to happen, and I told the universe how I want it to happen. And I would say, who told the separate universe how it was going to interact with itself? It's like, and you know, if the human mind or organism needs to sort of navigate that way, once again, it's fine. I would just always look at the, you know, all different ways of looking at it, because there's freedom in the unknown nature of it's always changing anyway. So it's just a reminder to keep looking at that. Is that really one thing relating to another, or is it a story, you know, working out a story so it can feel more secure that it didn't do it right in the first place?
When you were talking a minute ago, John, I have been the last, up to now, I've actually had a big difficulty with, I feel like I'm trying so hard to listen, stretch my ears, to hear right down into my heart. I want to understand you. I want to really learn this. It's like something in me wants to just drop the limitation in my head. But it feels like there's a great big effort going on. And I've mentioned my work, but when I work, I just let go to the universe. I know I'm in oneness and it happens. And when I was listening to you, I finally just let go in the way that I do with work. And I thought, oh my goodness, you're the universe too. Bernie's the universe. So I'm trying to listen to you on a human brain level whilst understand you in a limitless way. No wonder it's so effort filled. And I think for a moment, I finally let go of that box of a brain trying to listen to the brain, and realized that something beyond that in you is communicating to something beyond in me. And that felt like such a relief. I know I've only just got that feeling, but it's a lot less of a struggle, because it felt like I was trying very hard and not doing very well, even though my heart was in it, you know. I don't know. That was just a moment while you're talking that happened.
Oh, I think that's actually very insightful. I think that's very insightful, because it's why this discussion is so beautiful. And I was playing back last week. It's because there's a freshness about how does this, what? It's like, this is all different. And so it's from here, it's more difficult to explain this in a way that doesn't shut you down, doesn't shut the mind down to say, no, that's not the way I see things. That's enough. Because that's really, you know, some people talk about, most people can absorb a certain amount it's not even above, but a certain amount more than they're already comfortable with. And if it breaks through that distance, you know, so if you I don't want to give numbers because then it looks like it's a scale. It's not. It's just like if there's a certain understanding to here and then you push it too far, it contracts and shuts down and won't listen. The mind, consciousness, whatever your word is, the human mind, you know, the human security. And that's what's been going on. There's this struggle to make it keep opening because Jane, that character, has explored enough to be open enough. You know, you've looked into this, you are exploring, you are open. And that's such a beautiful thing to do. I nearly had tears in my eyes when you were relaying that story, because it was so, firstly, I can relate as this character John. I can exactly relate to that, because it's like, oh man, that's what I was saying last week. If you need to have a break because this is all just really destabilizing and just exhausting, basically, that's fine. It's normal. That would be a normal reaction of this conditioned human body to go through when it's sort of just recalibrating, reintegrating, reconditioning, whatever it's doing. But ultimately, it's effortless. Effortless. The effortlessness is what I'm trying to point to. It is effortless. You know, it's very lovely to hear that has relaxed, because this is a communication with itself, talking to itself. There is just one awareness, life, consciousness, whatever you want to call it. There is just one thing here, communicating with itself through the appearance and blossoming of bodies. And that appearance is amazing. Individual human beings doing what they're doing, sort of apparently as individuals, separate things, aren't really separate. It's one thing connected. And the human experience and the mind and the thinking brain and the instincts and biology contracts it into being separate, but it's not. It's just an experience of being separate. If you can see all living creatures, and not even all just living, it's like nature, it's like everything, every piece of vibrating energy is the same, connected, one energy. It's just expressing differently in a human brain with all of its thinking capabilities. And even thoughts are just part of the texture appearing that way. So all of it's the same. So this is just, it is effortless, because it's finding itself back to its effortless nature. It's inherent, interconnected. You don't have to do it better than life can do it. Just the mind thinks it needs to work out how to do it. The mind really is just struggling to let go when there's that tension, and it's wanting to find a way that makes sense to let go, an object, a way of doing it. It's like, I'll do it like that, I'll do it like that, I'll do it. I think I got it. No, I didn't get it. I can't work out. What did you just say? No, and it's trying to work all. It's not meant to be done like that. This is just washing through. The words will do what they do, and then forget them. Forget them. You might want to listen to it again on the internet, on YouTube, but just let them wash through. And this intelligence, this awareness that's running everything will do what it's doing. It will start to see itself, and it's effortless. In fact, trying to do it is trying to do it from a separate self, and it just reinforces that anyway. So by trying to get free of it, you're reinforcing the separate self that isn't free already of it.
What you're also helping me to see, John, I think, and it's making me very emotional in a good way, is the sudden realization of I suddenly feel safe in the world, and I don't think
lovely.
Safe, because suddenly all these people who could be threatening, now that I understand and I feel deeply, I know that they are infinite energy, there's no threat. And that feeling right now is quite outstanding. It's very profound. Feeling safe. And it's more knowing not just what is in here has a oneness, but everything around me has that oneness as well. That for me is quite profound. Thank you.
They really are the same you, actually, even if they don't know it. And I'm just calling them they. but they're just different perspectives in the same thing. Probably asleep to itself through the human experience.
In the moment, I just feel like I finally understand what the word forgiveness is, and it's not really forgiveness, it's acceptance, and it's just I don't know, it's like the feeling I have right now is like non-resistance to, total non-resistance to, and as if memories and thoughts and things are just, there isn't anything there at the moment. That's the feeling I have at the moment, and that's peace. That feels like peace. Yeah, sorry, I'll shut up now because I keep interrupting.
Don't let that kick back in. Don't let that kick back in. You don't need to. You are just exactly what you are, talking, and that's perfect. There's no apology needed, because that's just, it's the instinct, the contracted instinct of back to, I better go back to being the separate me again. Just stay open. Feel, talk, express, that's all. There is talking happening, there is emotions happening, there is judgment happening, but there's no forgiveness that's actually from anything to anyone to anything. It's an appearance of an idea in this texture. So if it does that, it's okay. But actually, ultimately, there's nothing to forgive by one to another, because one is the other. There's nothing to accept, because there's no one there accepting, apart from the concept of an idea of a self. You see, they're all there. They can all appear as thoughts and ideas, but they really are just parts of this. So the acceptance is not even needed to be accepted. I think you said it better when you said it's just not resisting, because that's just open. That's just this interactive, beautiful, flowing. It is wonderful.
You know, John, all my life I have probably my greatest desire, my greatest yearning has been just to be able to, and just to be allowed to love everyone, because that's what I feel inside. And the reactiveness of life through my life has taught me not to. In this moment, not only do I feel free and I feel this just nothing there, but the delight is that this is a safe way to have everything I've ever yearned for be a fact. It just is a fact in this moment. Every particle of people who I felt so curled up and away from, and it's not safe to love, they've just sort of melted into that melting pot that you're talking about. And there isn't a form, but there is just this feeling of love this way and this way. And you're right, it is, I can't describe it. It is just feels like non-resistance. It's an incredible gift that you have helped me to touch the beginning of, really. Thank you.
You know, we're just using words to describe things that are sort of being quantified as well. And I'm doing it here as John, and you're doing it there. But I can sense the underlying truth is happening there. And a few helpful additions might be that it's especially normal to relate these things in stories that I have those. Just look at that, but and to also try and work out things and to then put it into idea, and just be mindful at the same time while that's going on. Is this feels like that unconditional nature of loving isness that is going on here is recognizing that everything else is doing the same thing. It's unconditional recognition, which could be called unconditional love, which is already the case, and it's just being allowed to be what it is. That's what I think you might be experiencing. It's just a read on that and putting it back into words and offering it back. I don't know, but this recognition, recognizing everything to be connected and harmonious. And there can still be like frictions and things that seem to happen in life, but ultimately, this is just polarities happening. But ultimately, it's this unconditional loving nature of what it is to itself, and that's what's being offered here, and that's what's responding to itself. So that is the impulse here, to wake that up in anyone else that wants to explore it. And it's a lovely interaction. It's a beautiful interaction. It's a high quality, because it's so unknowingly, innocently raw. What you're doing is just beautiful to watch from here. Because it's just that, it is that loving nature finding itself in all of this.
But I think it's also the fact that you two are so absolutely unconditional in front of me is helping me to feel safe enough to let go enough, if you know what I mean. So I hope you know how much my heart is a little bit sore right now in gratitude, in a good way. I hope you can feel that gratitude very much right now.
Yes, but it doesn't feel separate to me to hear. I got to use words. It's happening. It's all happening together. That's what's happening. It's just an interaction. There's not really anyone here that can this. It's all together. It's all the same. So this is blossoming. This interaction is blossoming in itself. But the words are beautiful, and they're worth communicating, because it's ways of saying something that doesn't. It's the underlying thing that we're not explaining that is actually what's happening here. But beautiful. It's beautiful to interact with you, Jane. I'm just trying to guide with words. But as I keep saying, we could sit here for 15 minutes. When that's opened, which it is to a large extent now, and the words really are just can be just then like a caress. It's all that's needed. They're just a caress of recognition. That's what the words end up being. A caress of recognition of itself and appreciation of its one interactive, beautiful, unconditioning, loving nature. But there's a reaction here also in the body that feels very peaceful. There's an activity in the heart that is felt. So thank you for offering that back. And sit with that. And don't think. I'm just making words, but there is peace in this being what it already is, without the noise. You okay?
I think I'm more than okay, Jean. When I was a child, I had this innate knowing that I was safe, and I haven't got a clue when that disappeared. And this is the first time since then that I have that absolutely filling me of an absolute knowing that I am safe. It's not in human terms safe from something or someone. It's just that feeling of being safe. It feels good. It feels really good.
It sounds like the story that people that have maybe have died for a moment, or the stories that they bring back, and it's usually that they just feel completely safe. There's nothing to fear. So I haven't had a near-death experience myself, as John, as this. The only way I can talk about this individual human experience is to call it me and mine, but it's not really. It feels like that doesn't feel like the right words for it, but it's the only way I can say it. But I haven't had a near-death experience, but what seems to be unknowably there is that there's nothing to fear, because every time it's thoughts come up and referenced, and history, and as I said, that subconscious stuff still plays to some extent, and probably to an extent that I consciously am not aware of as this human being, John. But more and more, I think, as you explore this and it opens and it settles and it reconditions itself, it just sees that, as I said, always say that biology probably has instincts. If you try to stop breathing, you can't. But the innate psychological suffering that we create in our insecurities and stories, and object of me being that and separate from this, and all of those things that happen in the mind can recondition to fall away, can be opened and explored and awakened to, which feels like that's what's happening there. That awakening to itself isn't something mind-blowingly explosive. It's just awakening to what it already is. And then realizing that it can continue to be all of this that's been happening, all of this personality, and it can even have all of the imperfections and all of the subconscious characteristics and the subconscious autopilot. It's all okay. It's all okay. Because it's all this. It's all the same thing. It's all unconditionally loving, and life doesn't have an impulse to be cruel to itself. And there's just ignorance in other human beings, perhaps sometimes in this life, that it appears that is, separate and harmful, but it's really just like deers in the headlights. That it's not intention. There's no person. It's not personal. It feels personal from that contracted perspective, but as this opens up and you start to look into this, you don't know how else to say it, but it's seen that those others are just suffering. So when bad things are happening with those others, supposedly separate ones, they're just you. They're just you into the different texture with a different confused, or it's not even confused, because life is doing everything perfectly. There's just textures and polarities and appearances, thoughts appearing.
The difference was when you're talking is I've tended to just accept that people have insecurities. I think I've accepted that all my life. But the difference was when I opened, rather than my ears, my mind to listen to you, and seeing that you were communicating from that as well, rather than the brain and the limitation, was a sudden realization that rather than, for instance, looking at my ex-husband as the individual, suddenly I realized that no matter who or how anyone is, it was that realization that everyone is this infinite intelligence, and that's what I can see, and that's what I can relate to, and that's what I can interact with, and that's what makes me feel safe, because suddenly everything and everyone is that exactly what you two are being right now with me. And in that realization, and not defining other people as a limitation, that's what's making me feel safe somehow. It's like my view of the world has changed rather than my view of myself, if that makes sense. As being is as if I'm looking at and I'm listening to and relating with differently than I was before. And it's a lot less effort, I'll tell you that. Even if I'm just scratching the surface at the moment. It's I love the fact that in this moment I can sense my ex-husband's energy. I haven't seen him for many years, and I can feel nothing other than unconditional love for him and from him. None of the stories exist. It's like they've all disintegrated somewhere. That to me is so precious. It's probably in my mind as an example right now. I can't even see him as flawed or as limited or as a reason. I can just see and sense that feeling of unconditional, and it is such a blessing to be able to do that.
Well, ultimately, he is a story. Ultimately, he's really just a story. So there's not any personal, there's not any separate personal self there really, apart from the thoughts about what it all is. There's the complex expression of life with its personality appearing as him, with accumulated experiences that probably definitely beyond that human being's control, didn't choose all of those things, and then they're re-expressed. So for whatever character traits might have seemed less than ideal, perhaps, or beautiful, and the beautiful character traits, they're all just appearances. They're all just exposure. There's the complexity of how that's appearing is just part of this. So the idea that that happened here as well. I was supposedly wronged as this individual, and you go through phases where you learn to forgive, and then you feel better about you being a better person because you're forgiving and all of these things, right? Now I'm good because I can forgive, and then it gets to a point where there's absolutely nothing to forgive, really, because it's not personal. There's lots of stories that the mind and the spiritual backgrounds can come up with about why that happened. And I remember one of the books I read was Radical Forgiveness and Radical Acceptance, and I read all of those books, and they were really helpful at the time, because the contracted mind goes, I gotta find a way to let go of this anger. I've got to find a way to let go of this anger and find a way to justify it. So then you actually apply a story to that individual and why they did what they did, but they didn't know, because really they were, the stories that, can be applied, can be that they came down to help you, and, and so that was triggering. And maybe there's a bit of that in there anyway, but the main thing was then that all just falls away, because that's just life doing that. And then there's no forgiveness, because there's nothing to forgive. There's just no real separation there to have anything to blame for. Things happen, occurrences can happen that seem terrible at the time, but yeah. How you doing, Bernie?
Yeah, good. Loving it.
Okay. I'm just seeing if you if
Still
you
alive?
sort of no, just whether it's sort of resonating with you or.
Absolutely, yeah. It's like this, noticing that its nature is love, and then the mind wants to sort of play along with that and apply characters to that love, but yeah, ultimately noticing that your nature is love and your nature is peace and freedom.
And I could sit here for another 5 minutes like that, but it's just amazing to, I don't know about you two, but that sitting there like that without the need to do anything else is peace. It's just a little reprieve, and carry that through in the experience of day-to-day living. And that can always be referenced, and once it's tasted, that can always be referenced. That can always be accessed. It might be noisy to start with, but it's there. So those moments are beautiful reminders of what's real. Because what's real is not what all this thought stuff does. What's real is that. It feels like safety. It feels just like peaceful being. So, and I'm not saying that safe is a bad word, but you don't even need to be safe. It can feel that way when the rest isn't there. And this is when the rest isn't there. It can be quite a tangible stillness. If you went out to a bar and sat with someone like that, they'd probably feel really uncomfortable, because it's not how humanity works. It's like, whoa, I got to break the silence somehow. In a way I did, because, we're interacting here over Zoom. But if we're sitting in a hall, you can sit there for as long as you like. And I've sat with people, and there's been some really, really weird, absolutely beautiful stillnesses that have been almost like a fullness in it. And yet nothing needs to be understood. But it feels full and complete. And I've come out of these moments with people where we've had discussions and we've just both gone, whoa, is something weird going on there? Yeah, that was weird. It's like a bubble of full, peaceful stillness that was it's like in a cone of silence. It's really, really interesting. That's actually how we are. That's what's really going on. That's what really is happening. And I would say, just sitting here like this in the afternoon doing this allows it to be known, so it sort of allows that to seep into the conditioning and be an option. This is what it already is. It's allowed all the other stuff to just stop for a moment, and to what is there, what really is the nature of what's going on, just to enjoy itself for a moment. Personification, but it's, you know what I mean. I think you understand when I'm personifying, I'm just using a concept to explain something that's unexplainable.